This month, we're going to be celebrating the life of Confucius, a very famous Chinese philosopher and teacher. And in honor of him, we're going to be creating a Chinese art inspired project. We're going to be looking at the Terracotta Army. The Terracotta Army is a collection of ceramic statues. Ceramic means that it's made of clay. So it's that type of clay that gets hard when we put it into the kiln, which is a big oven. And these sculptures are life size. So each of these sculptures are as big as a grown man. The Terracotta Army was created around 210 BC by the Emperor Qin. Emperor Qin was a very powerful emperor of that time, and he was not satisfied with just having his own empire. He wanted an empire even after he passed away. So he had all of these sculptures made to protect his tomb after he passed away. There are over 8,000 sculptures of these soldiers. There are also horses and weapons, cavalries. It is quite amazing. And these sculptures are buried in different pits around the burial site. The Terracotta Army was discovered in 1974. A farmer was digging a well in Xi'an, China, and pretty much accidentally found all of these sculptures buried underground. So then the archaeologists, which are scientists who study the past by looking for the remains and objects left by people who lived long ago, the archaeologists came to the site and discovered that these were over 2,000 years old and belonged to Emperor Qin. I have this video that explains a little bit more in detail about the Terracotta Army, so I will leave a link in this week's assignment. Please watch this video as well. With this week's art project, we're going to also be looking at the principle of art proportion. Proportion is the size relationship between objects in a work of art. So big versus small, thick versus thin, all of those differences in sizes are called proportion. There are two types of proportion that we learn in class. One is facial proportion. Facial proportion is the size relationships between the parts of the face. And we learned this when we did self-portraits. The other one, which we're going to be focusing on for this project, is body proportion. Body proportion is the size relationship between the parts of the body. Proportion helps us draw realistically. On the left is an example of a drawing with accurate facial proportions. The eyes are in the right place. The mouth is the right size. The head size can be divided into different proportions to draw accurately. So it looks very realistic. This is an example of inaccurate facial proportions. A person does not actually look like this. The head is not squished like this. The eyes are not this big. The neck is not that small. So it is incorrect facial proportions. That doesn't mean that this is bad artwork. It is just not realistic. So not all artwork has to be realistic, but if you do use accurate facial proportions, it will look more realistic. Here's an example of accurate body proportions. So body proportions means how big the head is compared to the body, how long the legs are compared to the rest of the body. All of those size relationships are called body proportions. Here's an example of accurate body proportions. So if you draw using correct proportions, it's going to look like a realistic person. Here's an example of inaccurate body proportions. The human head is not this big compared to the body, but again, it doesn't mean that this is bad artwork. It's just a different style, realistic versus more cartoon or unrealistic. So if you look at the Terracotta Warriors, these guys have great body proportions. A grown male, a man, is said to have about, and it depends on the person's height, but about 8 heads tall. So this is how tall each head is. And there's 1 head, 2 heads, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So he is 8 heads tall. If you look at the Terracotta Warrior, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 heads tall. So Terracotta Warriors have very realistic body proportions. Here are some other examples of photographs of the Terracotta Warriors. Each of these faces are different. Things that they're wearing are different based on the rank in the army. There's some colored parts, which we'll be talking about in a second as well. There's horses and chariots. There are weapons. And a lot of times the warriors are not holding the weapons because these are skinny and they break very easily. So a lot of times when they dig up the statues, those were already broken. So if they look empty-handed, that just means that they were probably holding something at some point, but they just broke over time. Some more examples. Horse. All of these statues. Here's an example of this guy was probably holding a sword or something in his hand. These warriors were not made like regular artwork where one artist makes everything from the start to the end. It was made more like a factory. So there were some artists who just got the clay ready. There are some people that just pushed the clay into molds to make these shapes. There are artists who just made the skirt part. There are people who put these things together. There are artists who carved and made each of these sculptures different and changed the faces. There are people that just put these in the kiln. Finally, there are people that just painted. So when we look at the Terracotta Army now, all of these figures are pretty much just brown, which is the terracotta color. It's a special kind of clay that has this color. But originally they were painted. And we think that they're painted with very bright colors. This paint, unfortunately, did not survive over time. And whenever they dig up a new soldier, the paint just kind of flakes off because it's in a very dry area. So the scientists and archaeologists are trying to figure out a way to preserve the paint. So a lot of these soldiers are still buried underground to make sure that the paint doesn't fall off while we figure out how to preserve the paint. The warriors travel around the world in famous museums where people can go see, or you could travel to the site in Shan, China to see the actual sculptures. So here is this week's assignment. Our goal this week is to understand art worlds. Understanding art worlds is to learn from other artists and other cultures. And of course, we're looking at Chinese art. So I have an example video of how to make the project. Please watch that video. And your task is to draw a terracotta warrior if you're in 4th grade. If you're in 3rd grade, you're going to draw a terracotta horse. And I will have specific instructions in this week's assignment on how to do that. While you draw these, please pay attention to the proportions. Make sure the head size of the person or the horse is the right size compared to the rest of the body. Look at the length of the legs and all of those parts. Once you're done drawing your warrior or your horse with correct proportions, then try and add some original designs. You can look through the slides and look at what kind of designs are used in the original sculptures, or you can look up your own images with your device. Remember that our goal is to understand art worlds, so I would like you to make sure that the original designs that you add is inspired by Chinese culture. When you're finished adding your original designs, then please trace it with something waterproof, which might be Sharpie marker or crayon. And next week, we're going to be adding some paint. So if you use marker, then the marker might run. So make sure it's something waterproof. You do not have to add a background because we're going to be cutting these figures out. When you're finished, please make sure you send me your work through Artsonia or Canvas. We will continue to work on this project next week.